Okay, here we are again. Welcome back, everybody. This is the We Quit Booze Brothers, which is a podcast where we try to have honest, no fluff conversations about our various experiences of quitting alcohol. And with me, as always, is my brother Matt. Hello, Matt.
Hey Mark, yeah, back again. We're here for another evening of us two old people whittering on about our journey with sobriety and hoping that we've got some topics for you which you find interesting. You know, it gives us great pleasure in doing this. So yeah, we've got a cool topic. This is one that you picked actually tonight. So I know
Yeah,
we were chatting about it the other week, weren't we? And you said, "Oh, let's do one on this because." I know
mm,
it's something that affected you greatly. So I'll hand
yeah.
back to you. You can let everyone know what it's about, and then we'll crack on.
Okay. Yeah, less of the old if you don't mind, but yeah. Anyway, so this one, actually, I'm just going to read it out because this was a comment that one of our listeners left on the last podcast that we did, and the last podcast that we did was in that podcast. I think I outlined a typical week of my drinking behaviour, and this one sort of caught my eye, so I'm going to read it out. So the comment was another great podcast. Thanks, guys. You're very welcome. Quite right too. Like that one. Um,
Excellent.
he said my drinking habits were very similar to yours, Mark, which have now totally changed. I've not 100% quit, but not far off. Now, that has totally changed the benefits, and the benefits are amazing. Most of all are the arguments with my wife, which happened when I drank. These have now gone, and we're so much happier. And it caught my eye for a couple of reasons, really. I think, first of all, the point that, not all of our listeners, watchers, whatever you could call it, have completely quit. I think that's an interesting dynamic as well. And maybe that's another conversation we can have about, does moderation work? And I think it obviously depends on kind of where you are at in your journey, where how bad things got for you. So I thought that was quite
Yeah.
interesting. But it also,
Interesting.
yeah, it is an interesting one. But it also really resonated with me about the arguments, and it reminded me how much my mood has stabilized since I quit drinking. And I've just got two examples that I sort of, when I think about them now, they kind of, I get a bit sort of, I guess, horrified in a way when I look back. There are two incidents that sort of leap out when I think back, and both involving my kids. So, two incidents where they'd done something, and to be fair, they, what they'd done wasn't great. I mean, they'd misbehaved. There was one instant where I just felt they were just behaving in this like horribly entitled way, and another one was where one of them in particular just did something to the other one which was just horrendous. But I fucking lost my shit. Like I just remember screaming at them. I didn't hit them, so that's one thing. But I just, I'm a grown ass man, and these were little kids, and when I lose my shit, like the volume went through the roof. And what's interesting now that I look back with the benefit of hindsight, maybe some wisdom and, a bit more mileage on the clock, is that when I analyzed those feelings, it wasn't, obviously there was anger. I was triggered. I got angry. I got angry very, very quickly.
Mm.
But I also, if I really think about it, there were all kinds of feelings in there. I think fear was part of it. There was some fear in there. There was some overwhelm. There was quite a lot of panic. And what used to happen to me when I drank is that my emotions were like kind of, my nerves were like frayed. Like I had these frayed nerves. Something would go wrong at work, and I'd get that pit of your stomach, center of the chest panic. And I I look like go back to those two instances with my kids where I just screamed. I said, what must that have been like for those two, young boys to just see their dad scream? It must have been terrifying, and it must have been horrendous. And it's no way to behave. Like I say, what they did warranted, some punishment, no question. It wasn't great, but what kind of an example was I setting? On the one hand, they did something wrong, and then to deal with it, I just exploded. And I was drinking pretty heavily in those days, And since I've quit drinking, my mood has just stabilized enormously. I don't get that angry anymore. I don't get that upset when things go wrong, professionally. I'm way more pragmatic about how I deal with it. I don't think anything is ever quite as bad. No, nothing's ever as bad or as good as you think it is. There's we tend to sort of occasionally you live in this world of extremes, but the reality tends to exist, somewhere in the middle. And it just, look, it was one of those comments, it caught my eye. It really reminded me of just that's another massive benefit that I have experienced. And this podcast is about our experiences that we want to share. And it's just that, my boys have now, I've got one teenager, he's 19, and my eldest is 22. So they're sort of I guess they're out of that sort of, the sort of solid childhood ground, but they can still push you, they can still test you. And I'm just much calmer. And they've even commented on it. They've said, old dad would have lost his shit. New dad is much calmer. And my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my friends, it's just on a much more even keel. And I just wanted to raise it because it's one we haven't talked about a lot, but it's definitely one which struck a real chord with me.
Really interesting because I've been through the same thing, and I think most people listening, watching this, whether they have children or not, everyone's been in relationships, everyone has friends, family, whatever it might be, and you definitely, I can remember arguing points which were totally like unnecessary with friends, or I can remember one time, and I think this is in the book, where a really good friend of mine, we were at a lunchtime do. It was really boozy, and his wife gave him some spicy food, and he reacted really badly, and I reacted towards him like really badly. And it was like, what a twat. I can't think of another word. And it wouldn't have happened had I been sober. And I think you can rationalize more. I think you can just, you perceive situations a bit more. I've got two kids, and they can drive me crazy. My son is a nonchalant teenager, not doing the work he should, and it drives me insane. But you know what? I look at it now, and I just think, and this is more of a global topic, really, is that when we shout and scream at our kids, would you do that to another adult? Would I do that to you? The answer is no. But we're moving on. So I'm moving on to something else now. But the reality is alcohol, is known to affect several nerve chemical systems, which are important in regulating mood. It's known to give or to aid, if you like, depression, and it affects the chemical balance in your brain. So it's no surprise that it has a massive effect on mood. And funny enough, as we do, we kind of researched this a little bit. Let's not go mad. We're not sat in the British Library going through books, but I think both of us do a little bit. Let's get our ideas together. And I just started typing in Google, do that sort of stuff. And I came across the drinkaware.co.uk website. And one of the things that was quite mad was it actually has a title, How Alcohol Can Affect Your Mood. And it talks about, drinking heavily and regularly is associated with depression. It talks about research studies having found that binge drinkers are more likely to have symptoms of depression. And you kind of think, all these things, it's just so obvious, isn't it? It's so obvious. We've all been there. We've all been there the day after. We've had those arguments. We've had those rows. We've treated our wives badly. We've done things that you just wouldn't do when you're not drinking. And the other thing that just made me stand back and just go, oh my God. And this was me, I think, not actually being truthful or as truthful as I could have been, because I was doing it quickly. That's why. But you can do a little calculator thing about your risk levels. So you put in what you were drinking a week, and it's a bit of, you do it by units or beers. And so it had pints, and I sort of thought, well, we used to go to the pub and I'd have maybe 3 or 4 pints. I'd probably do that twice a week. So let's say 8 pints, and that was being conservative, maybe. So I put that down. Then I was thinking wine, and it only had by the glass. So I'm thinking I need to be more by the bottle. So as I did, I think, how many did I do? I worked out like 6 glasses of wine. I did 6, 12. I think I did like 20 glasses of wine, something like that. Anyway, hit the button, and I think this is being conservative. I really do. And it basically said I was doing 50 units of alcohol a week. The
Mm,
standard or the recommended amount, I don't think there is a recommended, it's the wrong
mm,
word, but the amount that you shouldn't drink more than is 14 units.
yeah,
I was at 50, and I think it was more. So so then I click further, and it's like your age, and basically it comes out, and I was at basically possible dependence. The next one is like full dependence.
yeah.
And that's only because I think I generally didn't wake up in the morning wanting to drink. Later in the day I would, but there were some things where I wasn't quite that fully fledged dependent drinker. Not that I'm saying I'm better than anybody who is. There's no difference, no judgment at all. But the fact is, you just look at it. So anyway, possible dependence. Just quickly before I hand back to you, it basically says the score means you are at risk of possible alcohol dependence. You are also at dangerous risk of other alcohol-related problems, including 7 types of cancer, liver and heart disease, stroke, and high blood pressure. And then it talks about how you can get access to help with your drinking. But totally digress there. But interesting that a really famous site that is there to help remind work with people who maybe think they are drinking too much, had a section on how alcohol can affect your mood.
It is interesting. I mean, I think the reality is that if we're really honest, we'd probably get through 50 units in a weekend, stroke in a night sometimes, I think is the reality.
You're right.
Maybe not every weekend, but I mean, look, when we drank, we drank, and it's hardly surprising really that a substance like alcohol, which is so terribly bad for you, that it is so disruptive to your system, the fact that it's a type 1 carcinogen, for example, that it's a psychoactive substance, really it's hardly, of course it's going to impact on your mood, of course it's going to,
Yeah.
the word when I was thinking about the anger and the sort of how I would lose my shit with the kids, it's just I was a much more emotional person. Now look, I
Mm.
think age, maturity, I say wisdom inverted commas, probably plays a part in that. But what I would say is that by quitting alcohol, I feel like I created room in my life to do some of the work on myself that has enabled me to become just a much better person. I'm really proud of the person I am now, and that's something that's we're British. You don't say things like that out loud. You feel like a bit of a knob, but I'm okay with it. I'm really when my kids say things like "old dad would have lost his shit," and I'm just really pleased that I don't that doesn't exist now. That I don't walk that supercharged, easily triggered, nerves living on the sort of end of a frayed knot um, path anymore, that things are just much more stable. And so arguments with your spouse, arguments with your kids, arguments with your work colleagues, just getting annoyed with sort of stuff that happens, because stuff does happen. um,
Mm.
but I just think that when you quit, you're just so much better able to deal with it. So that was really it. Just that's the sort of point for this session really, and just yet another great reason to stick with it and consider a life without chucking that shit down the back of your throat.
Yeah, totally agree. I think nothing much more to add. I think one thing I would say maybe to close is that it makes you think a lot more. It makes you think about your reaction to things. The reality is shouting and screaming solves nothing. I put this in my book as well. Man Gets Sober. For anybody who's not heard of it, please pick it up. It's on Amazon. I think you'll enjoy it. But the reaction of other people towards a drinker is the way also you should learn from that, because if you are you know, like I say, shouting and screaming solves nothing. If you're pragmatic, you need to focus on the positives. You need to remind people what they're doing well. And now, that's what I try and do with my kids. They do drive me crazy sometimes, but I do sit there and think, no, let's focus on the positives. Let's say well done. Let's talk about what they can be and not what they're not. And that's so important.
Here, here, couldn't agree more. And yeah, great point to end it on. So look, we said before we started we would try and make this one a little shorter. I don't know if we've managed that. Maybe we have. So we'll leave it there. Please do all the normal things. Comment, like, do all the stuff that helps us to get the content out to as many people as we can. But yeah, other than unless there's anything else from you, Matt, I'll say. As I always say, never quit quitting. It's going to be a goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him. Till the next time. Thanks very much.
Bye bye.